in South Africa, where he developed a coherent account of harm that could be relied upon in moral theorizing generally, and with a specific application to ascribing moral responsibility to institutions, namely governments for harming through provision of inadequate healthcare services. Dr. Kom is working to be an inspiring thinker and a rising hope for philosophy in Tanzania. Dr. Kom, please, the audience is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope it's still morning. Good morning to you all. After all the bragging from my Vice Chancellor, and also from the guest of honor about philosophy, and also from Dr. Lekura, who just introduced me up here, I feel like I should talk a bit about my dissertation, but unfortunately my presentation today is nothing from my dissertation. I will be talking about an ethically relevant concept of democracy, and I will go straight to my presentation because I hope I won't be limited with time. Technical, please, doesn't work. All right, thank you. Unfortunately, being a philosopher doesn't make you a scientist sometimes. All right, so as I've been introduced, my name is Dr. Philbert Kom, and my main question of today's presentation will be, what concept of democracy can we rely on in our moral and political theorizing, and what is its practical implications? Because I'm not going to intend to develop some utopian or ideal concept of democracy up here. So before I start dealing with my presentation, I will first lay some footing to my argument. And this footing, I will use a quotation from Robert Tallis's article named "Democracy, What is it Good For?" He says, democracy is hard to love. It is noisy, frustrating, often irrational, and reliably inefficient. What's more, it is a dubious moral proposal. Democracy is the proposition that you rightly can be forced to live according to rules that you oppose, simply because they are favored by others. But that's not all. Democracy apportions equal political power to citizens, regardless of their capacity to wield it wisely. Thus, democracy involves the claim that you rightly can be forced to live according to the rules that are supported only by others who are demonstrably misinformed, irrational, or worse. Now, the question is this wasteful and terrible? I hope everybody here will say no. We do not intuitively think of democracy that way. Why would anybody think of democracy that way? I believe, and I think, someone who treats democracy only instrumentally will treat it as if it was wasteful and terrible. And for the advantage of those who do not know the distinction between instrumental value and intrinsic value, when we talk about instrumental value, we talk about something that has value not for itself, but it has value for something else that is valuable in itself. So we talk about, for example, money. You can have money, but then money is nothing. It has no value if it is not for using it to buy any other thing. If you have money in the middle of the desert where there is no food or water, for example, you may find yourself between a rock and a hard place because you have $1 billion, but you cannot buy water and food anywhere. So you will die. So the money will be useless. So things like money have instrumental value. So democracy will have a problem when we treat it as having merely instrumental value. And when we treat democracy as having instrumental value, it becomes merely a replaceable tool for achieving other values like justice, freedom, and equality. And then this is a problem, because eventually, if anybody comes in a government and says, I am a good dictator, I can give you justice and freedom, and I can give you equality, then you don't need any more democracy. So it will require justification. Why having democracy in the first place if, for example, a dictator can give us justice, freedom, and equality? So if we treat democracy as having instrumental value, it becomes wasteful, awkward, with unmanageable errors. And democracy is both terrible and in trouble when it's merely treated as instrumental value. Now, I will say, in order to rescue democracy from this problem, we can attempt a difficult task of showing that it has intrinsic value. It is a very difficult task indeed. So the question will be, do we really desire democracy for democracy's sake? That is a difficult question to answer. But then I will say no, we don't. Because if we are given a basket full of democratically chosen laws and a basket full of just laws or just ones, in Tanzania, for example, I will personally go for the just laws because I am not sure how many crazy people have democratically chosen the laws in the democratic basket. So it looks like we would prefer just ones or just laws to democratically chosen laws. But someone can come and argue with us saying, when we talk about anything just, it is something publicly acceptable. And if something is publicly acceptable, then it is democratic. So just laws are publicly acceptable laws, and therefore they are democratic laws. So the argument will be, logically at least, if justice is something we value intrinsically, so would it be democracy. But then this is not very much helpful as well. Still, the fact that democracy is intrinsically valuable seems to be counterintuitive. When I say counterintuitive, I mean we can formulate a counterexample against it easily. And then one, for example, is I wouldn't personally as well value democracy when my preferred candidate has lost in an election. Nobody would. So normally, if your candidate has lost in an election, you feel like, hey, I wish there was some kind of a coup d'etat to put my candidate in power. So we wouldn't value democracy in that kind of a system. So it looks like democracy is neither intrinsically valuable nor extrinsically valuable, that it is not even instrumentally valuable. So what is the value of democracy? Because if it is not valuable at all, there is no point talking about democracy anywhere. So I argue that democracy can be valued for what it is good for. And now I will give an example to show what I mean by saying we can value democracy for what it is good for. And I use this example from Robert Tallis as well. He uses hiking to show that when you hike, for example, you hike the Mount Kilimanjaro, you make your body fit. Even jogging, for example, when you jog, you make your body fit. So hiking or jogging is good for body fitness, and the vice versa. So body fitness is also good for hiking and jogging. So what we are saying here, as Robert Tallis puts it, body fitness is so much tied to hiking that makes the hiking possible, That means it is impossible to hike or to jog if your body is not fit, and also invigorating and enjoyable. So by using the means of analogy, we can try to make democracy be good that way. So we say the good of democracy and of such other values as freedom and justice reinforce one another. What I mean here is that democracy enables or enhances freedom and justice. And the more free and just we are, the more democratically we become. So we see that democracy is good for justice, but also justice is good for democracy. Thus, democracy's value resides in what it is good for: equality, justice, freedom, etc. It seems, therefore, that democracy can shape the laws to be morally correct, that to be just and acceptable to all, or justifiable. So, before I go into the concept that I think will be ethically relevant, I want us to look a bit about the meaning of democracy. So first, in order to establish the meaning of democracy, we have to know that the meaning and value of democracy are intertwined. We don't speak of democracy without adding value to what we want to say about it. So the more ethically relevant democracy is, the more valuable it becomes. And in fact, democracy cannot be described as ethically relevant if the meaning attached to the concept is merely utopian or idealistic. And this is what I want to do, to show that whatever concept that I think is ethically relevant is also practically feasible. So we want our democracy, our concept of democracy, to practically produce good in the sense of substantively just decisions. And now, my contention here is that there is an ethically relevant concept of democracy which captures the moral weight that we normally attach to the concept and avoids the problem of treating the concept of democracy as being merely instrumentally valuable. And now I will highlight three basic conceptions of democracy and then show why these other concepts fail, and then I will give the one that I take to be the strongest among the conceptions. I will start with the aggregative view of democracy. So the question is, what do we talk about when we talk about democracy? That is a big question. What do we talk about? So normally, when we talk about democracy, we normally describe democracy in terms of institutions and processes. So we will have the aggregated view or the schoolyard view. The first thing that you ask anybody, they will say about democracy, and commonly practiced everywhere in the world, is elections. So you will talk about elections. When you hear democracy, you will think about elections. So everyone who is eligible. In the case of Tanzania, for example, we talk about 18 years old and above, etc. So everyone who is eligible gets an equal say, as if an equal say is what we owe each other. So we say everybody gets to vote. And then aggregation. We add every individual say up, every individual vote. And finally, majoritarianism. The majority wins. So we have the leaders, and these leaders will represent us. They will make decisions for us, and we are happy about them. So this is what our view of democracy is. But then there is criticisms. We can raise a lot of criticisms to that kind of schoolyard view of democracy. Raising hands and saying the majority have won, so we are good. So I'm saying here that this view of democracy cannot do the ethical work. It cannot work. First, it is one that can result into rule by the irrational, the foolish, the misinformed, or the worse, as Robert Tallis puts it up there, because the majority could have these characters. And then, basically, it sidelines those people who have rationality, those people who are informed in making decisions of the country. So we are saying that most people in the majority, they could lack proper knowledge for the merits and the demerits of preferring A over B. So you choose someone, but then ask this person, why did you vote for him or her? They don't have any answer. They don't know the merits or the demerits of doing so. So another criticism to this aggregated view is that the minority may represent a strong preference. And now I will just, because this is a very vague and huge idea, I just decided to highlight the quality of voters. So think of the quality of voters. Think of, for example, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Anangisye, whose vote is just as equal and counts as equal to someone else who has never been to a class and doesn't even know how the world is moving around. So is this the proper way of dealing with the world? Now, Arrow's, there is a theory called Arrow's Impossibility Theorem by a scholar called Arrow, who developed it in 1951. He says it is impossible to transform individual preferences to rational collective decision or common good. And then here, actually, I decided to use an example in a democratic way. If I ask you here, wouldn't it be good for us all to contribute a little, just a little money, maybe every day or every month, and this money to be used in the villages to build roads and hospitals so that the country, people are happy in the country? I think most of us here will say, yeah, I think that is a good idea. But then if we say, okay, now I will be deducting money from your mobile money transactions. Everybody, whenever you do transactions, I deduct money. I am sure everybody here will say, no. My preferences are not really, they cannot really transformed into some collective common good, not all the time. And therefore, this aggregated view fails for that reason as well. And one last criticism to them is on what should the representatives' decision be based? On what? So I have chosen you to be my member of parliament, and you are going to the parliament. So who are you going to represent? Me, the majority, all, or yourself? Sometimes we hear our representatives in the parliament talking, and then you say, okay, this is a representative from Ubungo constituency, where the University of Dar es Salaam is, and he's saying these things. Who is he actually representing? It is a question that the aggregated view fails to answer. Now, I want to talk a little again about another view, common view of democracy, called the minimalist view. And this view I will also dismiss as irrelevant for democracy today. Of course, this view is different a bit from the aggregated view in that it is not about popular rule, not about popular veto, but rather a form of government characterized by fierce electoral competitions. So, in this kind of a view, elections are competitive struggles between elites for the people's votes. So forming policies believed to be for common good. It lays principles for what democracy is, as opposed to what democracy ought to be. And then in short, just to make you understand what this means, it refers to a democracy where political elites hold and respect elections, yet do not extend related freedoms that empower the non-elites, like civil liberties, free press, rule of law, etc. This is a quotation from the scholars you see in my slides there. Now, is this the democracy we would want to have, where some elites will compete and then they will have power, they ignore everybody in the society, they ignore the rule of law, they ignore anything, and then they formulate policies that they think they can use them to compete with their competitors in the next elections, because elections is what matters to them. Unfortunately, several countries, including Tanzania, have been mentioned as practicing some sort of this kind of democracy, Nigeria and several other countries. Now, we can criticize them quickly that this view also cannot do the ethical work. It cannot. It may because it may be remote from ordinary citizens' everyday concerns and views. If your idea is to deal only with your competitors during elections, you may ignore what people really want, even if they are non-allies. And then it is unable to answer normative questions. Why should we respect leaders, for example? Why? If they are there to compete with each other, they do not concern with us, why should we respect them? So this is a question that the minimalist view may fail to answer. So instead, today, I want to propose deliberation. And by deliberation, I mean a network of fairly regulated bargaining processes and of various forms of argumentation, including pragmatic, ethical, and moral discourses, each of which relies on different communicative presuppositions and procedures. Now, what is this deliberative view? So think of a democracy which has at least 3 characteristics. Number 1, the equality of citizens is not the function of voting only, but equal participation in public decision-making. What do we mean when we talk about these 3 characteristics? B, disagreement and opposition are dealt with by means of deliberation. That means meaningful engagement and discussion about what is good and what is bad for our society, rather than dismissed. So, because obviously we will always disagree with each other, we would always oppose each other. There will never be a day when the whole country or the whole world agrees on one single thing. So how do you deal with disagreement and opposition? Do you say, I don't want to listen to you, I don't want to hear you? No. Here, you deal with it by means of deliberation. And number C is being on losing side X. Being on losing side X does not exclude one from decision making. So even if you lose an election, you can still make decisions in the country. So deliberation allows for the hard work of staying present, even with those whom we have deep-rooted and fierce disagreement with, the norms of civility, respect, and taking each other as fellow humans. And so it also allows for not imposing your views on others and not refusing to listen to others' views. So you don't just impose your views to people, but you also listen to what they say. Of course, every kind of theory that we want to apply has criticisms. And I want to show that these criticisms don't work, and that's why I feel like it should be the ethically relevant concept of democracy. Of course, one criticism is too much democracy is a bad thing. Because, okay, you are done with elections, so you don't have to come and keep questioning about it. Or that everyone challenging everything may be constitutionally illegitimate. Like, for example, in Tanzania, actually, if the president has won, you don't go to challenge him anywhere, not even in the court. So it may be constitutionally illegitimate as well. But there is a defense for that. So by deliberation, we mean more than just the capacity to say or to speak, to say what you have in your heart. Deliberation creates an algorithm, a process for the governed to plausibly reject the unacceptable, whatever thing is unacceptable in the society, and for the readiness of those who govern to accept the logic behind such a rejection. Again, another criticism is deliberation ideal may not be practically feasible. What you're talking about is so beautiful, but then it is not practically feasible. Who says so? Eventually, there is also a defense for that. Let's think a little. What is so unpractical about deliberation? Deliberation in the sense of meaningful engagement happens in restaurants when we eat, which kind of foods are better than others. In bars, which kind of drinks are better than others. We always deliberate. In sports, which kind of teams are better than others. And it's happening here right now when we engage in discussions. So why not in political and moral theorizing and in our goals of living together in a society? So, just to conclude, because I was given 2 minutes here, what do we take from all this? The first thing is our conceptions of democracy are often skewed from the value that we normally attach to the concept. They force us to to view democracy as instrumentally valuable, causing it to be unable to do the ethical work and incapable of guaranteeing common good. Even so, democracy should not be thrown on the scrap heap. Using deliberative democracy, whereby everyone is entitled to some hearing, we are capable of both rescuing, disposing of democracy, and at the same time demonstrating its value. We can transform people's preferences and interests by means of collective deliberation in order to guarantee impartial solutions in decision-making after affecting large groups. So at the end, I want to leave you again with another quotation from Robert Tallis's Democracy, What is it good for? In a real democracy, even after the votes are counted, those who find themselves on the losing side are entitled to continue objecting, criticizing, and calling government to account. Even in the face of electoral defeat, we therefore remain equals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kom, for that insightful presentation. We are running shortage of time. I would like the audience to ask the questions, and if not the questions, if you have a short thing you want to add, you are welcome. So I'll take 3 questions for the first round, and we'll see if the time will allow us, then we'll see if we'll take another round of questions. So question, please. Ushers, if you can help us to rotate the mic. Yes. There was a hand there.
So, am I going to start? Yeah. Okay, thank you. My name is Musa Sadok, a lecturer in history. I would ask the presenter to give us a practical example of this model which he is presenting, the deliberative kind of model, in terms of governance. Because it seems to me it is a very interesting kind of model, but practically I haven't seen it being practiced anywhere in the world when it comes to governance. Yes, it might be practical in the ordinary kind of life, in bars, in restaurants, where people deliberate and whatever. But I've never seen it actually being practiced in governance. Could you give some example of your model which you are advancing?
Yeah, Dr. Kom, if you can note that question, we'll take another 2 questions. I hope you are noting the questions so that you can answer all of them together. There is a hand there, please.
My name is Hassan Musa, and don't worry, I'm just a third-year student. So I'm going to talk as a result of my curiosity and rationality as any other students will. Every time I cross a political debate about Tanzania, a political, economic, or social, I only get stressed with one question, and I would like to use this chance today. Maybe I'll get answers from the people who are competent in this. The question in my head is, I have 2 questions. The first question I always ask myself, and I would like to share with you, is, can you really, in a system you never designed? And if you can, is it hard or simple? Because as history says, the political and economical system that we are having in our nation right now, I'm not really sure if we made it. There are a lot of reasons, maybe colonialism and all. So are we really going to fit in these systems? Did we design them? So that is my question.
Let's take the last question from this round. Mike, please, Usher. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Combe, for the great presentation on democracy. I'm just talking from here. And from your presentation, you've talked so much, you've quoted so much from that great philosopher, Robert? Tallis. Yeah, Robert. My question, I'd like to know who this Robert is and where he's from. A student of comparative religions, PhD first year. You always have problem when it comes to some definitions from the Western world. An African student. So I would like also, if you could give us some of the examples maybe of democracy from our African perspective. If there are some great scholars that have talked about democracy from our own perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think they are great questions. Would you like to respond to the question from there, or you come to the podium? Okay.
Yeah.
Karibu.
Well, thank you very much for the wonderful questions. I think I should start with the last question. Well, in Africa, we have a lot of people who have talked about systems of governance and the best ways of governing in Africa. And some of the philosophers we have in Africa, including Mwalimu Nyerere, have talked about how, as Africans, we could lead ourselves and on what models. And even the minimalist view that I have actually decided to discard today is one of the views that was an African philosopher, Kwesi Weredu, has actually spoken so much against it. Because obviously it's like the Western world has been trying to impose certain democratic values based on elections. So there must be elections every 5 years or every 10 years. But then Kwesi Weredu was trying to say, no, this is not what democracy should be. So there should be some ways we can formulate a democracy in Africa. And of course, even the deliberative view is more of we can talk, we can sit down, discuss, deliberate on how we move forward from where we are. The problem is we tend to sideline those who have lost in elections. We say, no, you shouldn't take part. I am the one who won, so you are not part of the governance, and we end up running into problems. You asked about a scholar, Robert Tallis. Actually, Robert Tallis is someone who has researched extensively in the concept of democracy. You go to I don't know, even just simple Google Scholar, you can easily find a lot of articles by Robert Tallis. And I have quoted him at least 2 times today because his article, very recent one, 2020, on democracy, what is it good for? He has actually made a very good argument in the article. But he is also alive. He is a scholar who is alive. And I know I am following him also on Twitter. So you can find Robert Tallis on Twitter and engage with him. He is a very renowned person in democracy. Someone asked, where do we have a practical application of deliberative view of democracy? Basically, I wouldn't cite any particular country as having made full progress into that, but we know there are a lot of countries that are very involving. They would involve the opposition and other people on decision-making, to decide issues that are contested in the country, issues of disagreement in the country. You can use an example of the COVID-19, for example. When it first came up, several countries called or formulated a council made up of opposition members, and I can give you an example of South Africa, where one of the critiques of the government was also part of the COVID-19 commission. But then there are countries which will actually sideline the opposition in every decision making. And what deliberation does is to include everyone, that if you have lost the election, it does not mean you cannot make a decision for your country, or you cannot make any contribution to the country. Now, someone was asking, can you fit in a system that you never created or designed? Okay, this is a big question that we can we can argue here, but I know if this system is rationally designed, if someone with reasons have designed that system, you can fit in easily. The problem is we can have systems, and we can talk of a system or an institution like our constitution, for example. You can have a system like that where some reasons are not so well entangled. They are not so well designed, and so people won't be able to fit in properly. But what I'm saying here is, for your question, we can have a debate, an all-day debate about that, but then if a system is reasonably or rationally designed, then anybody can fit in. I hope I answered your questions.
So, thank you. A round of applause, please. For the interest of our time, maybe I can allow only one question. But before that, our next presenter is ready online. It's Professor Elke Mark. Professor, if you can hear us, please, the next presentation is yours. And so I'd like you to get prepared. Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, Karibu.
Thank you. My name is George Chua, and I have a few questions to a presenter, Dr. Philbert Com, concerning the deliberative democracy, as he proposed that the best form of democracy that we have to practice in our societies. Firstly, I would like to know if he doesn't think that this kind of democracy, it will be hard to be practiced in a society that comprises a larger number of people, a big group of people, because as he said that it most of one of which is requirement, there should be a kind of discussion about the issues concerning our society. So he doesn't think that this can take us back to the other form of democracy that he said is undesirable to our society. For instance, when you are talking about discussion, it means you need some representatives of the other side. You have talked of the opposition, maybe representatives. So this means maybe we have first undergone an election, and therefore we get those who have been elected to be a leader.
Sorry, can you be brief, please?
So, do you think this will be practical to a larger number of people, or a society that have a larger number of peoples? And the last question is about institution. We can have this kind of democracy, deliberative democracy, and in maybe our process of making decisions concerning our society, including election, but still we have institutions that work together with our government. Particularly, I'm going to pick up court as one of the institutions that concerning the justice in our societies. In court, as you know, the only one side it win. It means that there is no room maybe for the kind of deliberation that can be done to that particular institution. Just rely on one side means, and the other side lose at all. There is no way it can be a deliberation on this institution. So have you ever thinking about this institution which are working together with the government concerning this kind of democracy
Thank you.
proposed?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you got the question, please.
Yeah, well, if I understood Mr. Chua very well, you talked about whether deliberative democracy can be practiced by the majority. I mean, like in a country or society with many people, like in Tanzania. Of course, this is what I was actually saying, that we need not to sideline people. Just because they haven't gone to school, it doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to deliberate or to contribute to the country. Or just because they have lost in an election, it doesn't mean that they cannot participate in nation building and other efforts of the nation. So what we are saying here is that whenever you want to make a decision, you don't just do it because you won an election, because the majority have chosen you. No, you do that, you make decisions while listening, being ready to listen to what others have to say as well. There could be just one person in the country who can tell you, because obviously right now, if I am the president, I might say I want to build an airport at the University of Dar es Salaam. So take down some buildings, right? And then because I am the president, nobody will ask me anything about it. But then if you allow deliberation, people will tell you, no, this one it doesn't work because of 1, 2, 3. So we bring in reasons and to tell someone this is acceptable, as I said, and why it is acceptable for the country. So it doesn't mean that everybody will be saying certain things every time, or we won't have representation, but then we are saying that everybody should have an equal say even after they have lost in an election. And you talked about deliberation in court. Of course, I think one of the places where deliberation works very well is in court, I think. Because eventually, even if you know that I have done a certain thing, I have killed someone for sure, and there is video about that, you can easily, you still have to sit and talk to me about it, to hear my own side of the story. And this is what deliberation should be, to listen to others, and for the others as well to respect what you want to say. I think I answered your questions.
Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. So we are going to infringe our protocol, because our next presenter is going to be introduced by another presenter today. Our next presenter is Professor Elke Mark from University of Erfurt in Germany. He is going to be introduced by Dr. Muhoza, who is also a presenter. So Dr. Muhoza, please.
Good morning. Just overlook the title presenter of today. Now recognize me as a presenter of Professor Dr. Elke Mark. She's, you can now see how ready to talk to us. Elke Mark is an ethicist teaching at a Catholic theological faculty, but with a background in philosophy and economics. She has held the chair in the Department of Christian Social Ethics and Social Sciences, Faculty of Catholic Theology, University of Erfurt. Since 2003, she has lectured in various universities in Germany, including University of Kassel and University of Cologne. She has also served as an executive secretary at the Institute of Institute for Science and Ethics, University of Bonn, and as a student assistant at the Department of Moral Theology and Christian Social Ethics, LMU, Munich. Beyond academia, Professor Elke has served in different positions as a student assistant, UN Center for Transformational Corporations, New York, USA, as a keynote advisor in the planning department of Federal President Professor Dr. Roman Herzog in Bonn, Berlin. A responsibility she has been responsible in business ethics and social politics, an advisor at the Office of the Federal Minister of Transportation, Bonn, as well as an advisor on the economy of environment, Siemens. In 1994, she completed her doctoral thesis in business ethics at the Department of Business Ethics, University of Eichstätt, Ingolstadt. She has also published in other areas of ethics, for instance, the book A Christian Theory of Justice. That is our speaker, whom I heartfully welcome now to present her topic. Professor, welcome.
Hello. I hope you all can hear me. I'm very happy to talk to you, and thank you for presenting me in that very nice kind of way. I'm sending you greetings from Germany, which is very cold at the moment, and I wish I was at Tanzania. I assume you have it a little warmer than we have. I'm talking about a Christian theory of global justice today, and first of all, let me just say my little knowledge of African ethicists tell me that Western ethics should listen and hear what you have to say first. Authors like Odera Oruka, parental ursul ethics, would emphasize, for instance, an absolute right to human minimum and reject conditions of excessive inequality. All agreeing with that. An Ubuntu principle in African ethics will stress a principle of humanity, empathy, care, and solidarity. Your colleague Aiden Masafiri developed a theology of human rights in Africa, wrote about globalization of concern, and a book on environmental ethics, which is all very respectable in my eyes. I also completely agree with Philbert Komu to consider the principle of democracy in its deliberative interpretation as a key concept for modern ethics. I do it myself, referring to Jürgen Habermas, for a long time. As well as I could not more agree with Judith Valerian, who will take a stance for women's rights, who are one of the most important rights to be at stake in Africa. So, thank you so much for inviting me to offer my ideas as well. In the light of global poverty, political suppression of many people in the world, and the need of saving the planet, a just international framework is overdue. Therefore, Christian social ethics takes a stance for a new global order which is non-violent, socially just, and sustainable. Since we as Christians see a relationship among all people on the world, regardless of their religion, we often talk about a world's family. The major focus in favor of this world's family would be to find a just framework for us all, based on power-free communication between all persons concerned, who are all invited to find a fundamental consensus on global justice. As you can see, I refer to Jürgen Habermas and John Rawls at the same time and try to combine their important approaches with the Christian tradition. I'm convinced that we cannot achieve this with a one-sided and power imbalanced paradigm, nor should it be a paradigm based on claims of individual entitlements alone, since we are all social beings and all in the same global boat. So the consciousness for the fact of social, economic, political, and ecological interdependencies between all human beings should give rise to a new global order. On a cosmopolitan level, the justification of such is a challenge, because it equally must respect the ethical demands of all possible traditions, religions, cultures, and peoples on different continents, even those of minorities and smaller nations. A global framework can only be called just if all human beings have an equal status, guarantee of their human rights, and a right of giving proportional or representative expression to themselves. So Christian ethics would uphold principles of solidarity and the human dignity of the person, regardless of his or her cultural or ethical background. This cannot be done in the sense that one only resumes the role of a patron who knows where the deeper interests of all other people lie. It is even more absurd to take responsibility for someone who comes from a completely unfamiliar cultural or social background and might be suffering severe deprivation, but who is not asked for his or her needs, interests, or perspectives. When one takes a stance for a deductive ethics of right, nobody is really invited to get involved in a global discourse between human subjects. Ethical experts in the West cannot have comprehensive a priori knowledge of what the existential needs and interests of African people are. I tell you this from my own experience in other African countries. I haven't been to Tanzania yet, but Burkina Faso and southern African countries. So, to avoid all forms of ethical paternalism in ethics, there is no alternative to a process of repeatedly coming to a new global agreement on every fundamental issue of global justice. Notwithstanding, we can hardly think of any kind of global structure that would not be based on human rights. Human rights particularly amount to the code of principles from which a global order cannot really retreat. So some fundamental principles of right are crucial elements in a global structure in favor of the very poorest, like legal claims to basic goods, food, water, housing, the rights of subsistence, the right of physical integrity, the right of equality, rights to empowerment and participation, as well as the idea of new ecological human rights on sustainability, which are just recently newly claimed. It is obvious that human rights already constitute a normative consensus for the overwhelming majority of the world's population, which is why many ethical thinkers make them the irreducible starting point for their arguments. At the same time, however, they are not yet sufficient as ethical criteria with a view to resolving the fundamental problems of the absolutely poor, oppressed, especially women and girls. There are two reasons for this. First, as Amartya Sen found out, a human right of equality, for instance, has not only to be guaranteed by the rule of law in a public realm, but within households, within families, within private relationships. For instance, if FGM is not considered a crime within families, it takes much effort to build up public awareness that it is a severe violation of human rights of a woman. And this will only succeed after a long change of mind within patriarchal societies. Secondly, the goals of justice for equating the most disadvantaged people are not possibly achieved by developing states on their own. In a situation of malnutrition, drought, severe need of basic goods, underdevelopment, or undercapitalization of a whole country, global solidarity is overdue. And I mean, not just debts with political dependence like some African Asian deals, yeah? I mean really global solidarity. This undertaking of solidarity must not be a zero-sum game, nor does it just reflect a pure donor-recipient relationship between human beings or states. What is needed, however, is constant, fair political interaction and economic investment in the global south as a form of solidarity in a globalized world. Big capital must not wait with its investments in Africa until the wages in Africa are rising. Sorry, I made a mistake. Until the wages in Asia are rising, so Africa would finally be attractive for global capital. That's what Paul Collier said. Therefore, he proposes a more social capitalism. The Germans would call it a world's social market economy. To secure this aim, a global order should not only be founded on social motives, but also seen in the light of a long-term advantage for all human beings and the entire world. For some time now, it has been possible to demonstrate empirically that extreme situations of inequality, like the poverty and deprivation in parts of Africa, are counterproductive for the global common good. Empirical studies in development economics showed that the gains in standard of living, even in the realm of a gross domestic GDP, are less for the entire world and not just for the most disadvantaged if we leave out Africa south of Sahara. On the contrary, a global society where all have sufficient means of exchange is going to be beneficial to the entire world. That's macroeconomically clear. So just on empirical grounds, a certain form of mutual solidarity is consistent with normative reasons as well as further economic prosperity for the whole world. The same is right for climate change, which is not only a question of changing people's style of living, energy use, or economic production in Western states alone, but a question of changing all transactions into a sustainable system all over the world. Development economics, ecological ethics, and the ethics of justice coincide in this point and lead to the necessity of a reformed world order in terms of justice, solidarity, and sustainability. How do we justify that? That's the question. Following a democratic turnaround in modern ethics of justice, you just heard about this important point, this very same method can be applied to the global level likewise. For in view of a wide range of global problems like climate change, extreme poverty, and suppression of women and minorities, can only be solved by establishing a new global social order based on solidarity. Despite the many different cultures, religions, national identities, interests, and needs, a considerable number of problems can only be regulated by means of a world order to which all are needed to give their consent, at least on a hypothetical ground. Theoretically, we must ask how people would assent to a global norms of justice in a hypothetical neutral situation, where they do not know whether they are living in Norway or in South Sudan, whether they would have been born as a man or a woman, white or colored, whether in affluent or in needy circumstances, whether they will live today or in future generations. Only this kind of neutral approach would allow us to speak of a justified global social contact in the interest of all human beings, which would meet the criteria worked out by John Rawls' law of peoples and in full agreement with the Christian theory of justice. What is the particular Christian input in that global theory of justice? I think it is the principle of subsidiarity. To make it work, the whole order, Christian social ethics plead for an international order of subsidiarity in which the rich are not overflowingly demanded, but definitely obliged to a certain extent of solidarity. The measurement of solidarity is taken by the needs of the smaller unit, either states, communities, or individual persons. This implies that the social order must fulfill the basic needs and also the fundamental capabilities of all human beings as having equal status. So John Paul II already in 1991. Some cosmopolitan positions can be criticized in view of the fact that they make over-extensive moral demands.
Sorry, Prof. Prof, sorry, you have 3 minutes.
Oh,
Yes.
I was supposed to talk for half an hour. I have to.
Okay, if you can, we'll add you some more minutes.
I have to skip half of my lecture then. Okay. I try to make it brief. I told you about the subsidiarity approach, that we do not overburden the responsibility we take a stance for. I also would like to make a stance for the dignity of the human person, and I would have talked about that a little more, especially in terms of some African context. I also would have liked to talk about ecological ethics and tell you that we see it that persons are always prior to nature, and we want to make a personalistic stance, not a biocentric, transhuman, or plainly naturalistic stance. And as far as inequality is concerned, I wanted to make a stance for a global difference principle, according to Charles Bates and Thomas Pogge, who will talk to you today also. And finally, maybe let me just tell you the ethical paradigm of consensus, which I make a stance for, affords a better global structure. It calls for the inclusion of the poor nations in an economic and political sense and for their basis of living. In the light of this, we can assume that Africa would demand a global order which at least guarantees them a framework of inclusion in global economy, a better, really complete inclusion. Definitely rights of subsidiarity rather than subsistence, and a right of veto on further changes to global institutions to their disadvantage. You have to be much more included in global processes of finding a new social contract, which we are doing at the moment in terms of ecological rights and economic rights. A form of global solidarity involving poorer nations must exceed the threshold to self-development and participation in global processes of prosperity. This initial measure of solidarity and subsidiarity must change the disadvantages affecting poorer nations, at least up to the point where positive autonomy and subsistent independence activity become possible. Let me conclude. At last, a central precondition for the successful implementation of a global theory of justice is that it be compatible with the moral cultures of the countries concerned. In concrete terms, this means that such a strategy has to be thoroughly grounded in local, ethically, moral resources. At the same time, a strategy of this kind will always suppose those self-reflective processes in a culture which critically scrutinize their own traditions in the light of reinforcing or overcoming poverty and human rights violations within its own society. This ethically cosmopolitan approach must, however, get beyond the traditionally Eurocentric semantics and embrace the core elements of the various valuable moral cultures in the world. And I assume that East Africa can offer us a valuable treasure of ethical ideas, which we yet did not recognize for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your nice presentation. When I told you that you had 3 minutes, I mean that 3 minutes of presentation and 10 minutes meant for discussion. So I hope you exhausted a lot, and now let us receive the questions or response from the audience. Questions? Yes, I can see the hand. Okay. Please, can you take the mic there? Please.
Okay, thank you. My question is, because the professor right there has explained a lot of things, the one which I noted is about the global solidarity, about the global politics. So I will deal with the global politics. My question will be based there, because we have seen a lot of decisions which are made in the global systems. Mostly, they base and they are made by the developed country, while the less developed countries, especially those which are found on the African continent, specifically the Southern Sahara, are not considered. And if they are considered, their decisions are taken as substantial. So my question is, who stands in power and authority to morally, rationally and ethically judge the democratically made ends of democracy?
Sorry, one who is asking question, please, can you stand? Yeah.
Yes, my question is, who stands in power to rationally, ethically, and morally judge the democratically made ends of democracy? That the decisions which are made through democracy, who stand in that power to judge? Because we see the developed country, they can stand and say that this decision from Africa or this statement from Africa is not right. So I have seen that the developed country, they give themselves the authority to judge what we give to the global system. So I do wonder, probably there is an answer that who has that authority to judge the democratically made ends of democracy? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to make sure, Professor, can you get the question properly?
Yes, I'm not quite sure whether I understood it fully, but nobody is allowed to judge the outcome of democracy. We can only give everyone a possibility to proportionately join in what is not guaranteed at the moment. I mean, you have so many people in Africa, and what is your say, let's say, in the United Nations or in the World Trade Organization or in the World Bank? I think there's still a hegemonic advantage for those who put in the large sums. But in terms of democracy, I think we are not allowed to judge any outcome if democracy is put right, if everyone has a saying, and if not only the majority is the question. You have to think democracy further on. You have to think it as an elaborated, deliberative process which is aimed for consensus, not only for majorities voting out minorities. That's a very rudimentary idea of democracy. But I don't know whether I really met your question, because I didn't know what you were saying about less or least developed countries. Maybe I should give the question back and ask whether I really hit it.
Yeah, friend there, can you ask again your question, the second part? Okay. Sorry, Professor, because we are running the shortage of time, so we can try.
I'll try to repeat it.
Okay.
My question was.
Let's do this. You can write your question and you'll send it to Professor and try to engage with that.
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So another question, the last question, because the last question for this session, for this presentation.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
My name is Zaria. I want to ask you a question. As an ethicist, how with ethics can solve political issues in Africa?
What? I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
Yes. How is ethics solve political issues in Africa?
How is ethics
can solve political issues?
How can ethics solve political issues in Africa?
Yes.
Yeah. Solve political issues. Well, ethics is a weak power, but it works if you really integrate it in public awareness, and if you have public awareness processes of majorities, you can change policy. Democratic majorities who have the right ethics, who really fight for justice for themselves, can change totalitarian regimes. We've seen that ourselves in Germany. I mean, we had a complete totalitarian German East state. We were divided, yeah, And there was a majority of people who wanted to have more freedom, human rights, mobility, and prosperity. And they changed the system. They changed political totalitarian negative power into democracy, into real good democracy, and now the East Germans are as well off as we West Germans always were. So I would say just use the soft power here and build up a real social change movement if you're not satisfied with the policy.
Thank
I
you.
know it's very difficult, and it goes slowly, yeah, and you can only do it in groups, and if you have majorities, you can not sacrifice yourself as one person.
I hope Professor made herself clear. I think many people love to ask questions, but we have other presentations ahead of us. So let us give a round of applause to a professor from Germany.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor. Now, maybe I can see people sleeping. Yeah. Maybe I'm not good at energizer. Com is very good in that, but today is in a high table, so I cannot disturb him. Can you stand up, please? Everybody, can you stand up? Yeah, if you stretch yourself, try to write your name by using your head. Yeah. Yes. Kama wananiambia hapa, why should you abide to my order? Kwa nini mmesimama? Yeah, mnakubali tu kusimama. Okay. You can sit, please. Okay, so the following presentation is with the title Tanzania Women, Economic Justice and Rights Prospects. This will be presented by Ms. Judith Valerian from Sokoine University. Ms. Judith is going to be introduced by Valerius Mjun, who is a member of department. Please, Valerius.
Thank you so much for recognizing that it was above me. Judith Valerian is a lecturer in the Department of Philosophy, in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness in Sokoine University, located in Morogoro, Tanzania. You know I like much philosophy, sorry. She received a Master's of Science in Agribusiness and Food Economics from the University of Copenhagen and a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness from Sokoine University of Agriculture, SUA of Tanzania. She is currently writing a PhD dissertation program on poultry value chain in the program run jointly by Sokoine University and the University of Copenhagen. For the past 7 years, she has been facilitating undergraduate courses in the field of agricultural economics, particularly in the courses of agricultural economics and development, introduction to agribusiness, agribusiness skills, agribusiness and entrepreneurship development, agricultural price analysis, and the agricultural policies. She has consulted a number of organizations, including, to mention just a few, the Business Environment Strengthening for Tanzania, Agriculture and Sector Actors Forum, the so-called ANSF, Agricultural Council of Tanzania, ACT, Tanzania Chamber of Commerce, Industries and Agriculture, TCCIA, GAT-SBY Foundation, as well as DTM-AWS. On those organizations, she has given much of her efforts. She's also a member of Agricultural Economic Society of Tanzania and Higher Learning Institutions Network. Our research interests are on agribusiness, entrepreneurship, innovation, sustainability, business environment, internationalization, and agricultural value chains. With all being said, I hereby invite her that she be on this portfolio giving a warm speech. Karibu.
Okay, a very good morning to you all. No, good afternoon, sorry. A very good afternoon to you all. As I've been correctly introduced, my name's Judith Valerian, and I will take you through my presentation today, which is on Tanzanian women prospects for economic justice and rights. And of course, I'm from SUA. I know we have SUA alumni here, so I salute you all, and I'll just go directly to my presentation. Let's talk a little bit about women. We're just saying women and women and women, and it has been like a melody everywhere you go right now. So about 51% of the population in Tanzania is constituting of women, but they are very, I consider them a very strong pillar for any thriving economy. Do we have a background noise? Okay. So these women are actually participating in various number of activities ranging from agribusiness. I'm going to be a little biased there because it's where I work, but also in administrative, family leadership, maintenance, but also of recent in sectors like, which are considered to be male-dominating, like transport, peace and security, and so forth. But according to the Gender Inequality Index, it shows that the labor force participation is actually 79% for women and 87.4% for men. And but then again, we all know women are the main caregivers in many households, irrespective if you have you are employed or not. We are the main caregivers. And again, another fact which is really important is that women spend about 4 times more hours working to unpaid duties. And these unpaid duties would include things like domestic job, retail, hospitality works, which are characterized with very low returns as compared to men. So now let's see on the highlights of this economic rights and justice. This is a very important agenda in the SDGs 2030. And it's also considered as one of the basic human rights, but also imperative for economic development and growth, as I've mentioned, if you look at the population and the like. So again, we have issues when you talk of these rights and justice. When you're considering women, they include a lot of things, but these are just few that I picked. So one would be the intimate partner's violence, which is, I'm sure we are all aware. Nowadays we see a lot in mitandao ya kijamii, a lot of violence, but it's not taken care of. Again, we have discrimination at work, which is sometimes very silent, but it's there. But we also talk of discrimination in the family laws. Again, an equal access to resources. And this I will speak a little bit during what I found out when we did a very small study. And women are actually excluded, mainly in decision making. And probably could be the culture or whatever, but there that feeling there. There is also existence gap in the legal identity. So these are just some of the problems that we see. But women's rights are actually in Tanzania are protected by both public and private agencies. And if you follow news and social media and Twitter and stuff like that, you'll see a lot of efforts that are being done to at least make sure that we have equality. But again, we still have a lot of challenges that are still there. For example, the police coherence and coordination that is supposed to assist these women is still missing. We have governance issues. We also have, even when there is a project to support, there is always an inadequate budget to furnish that particular project. So how did we go through to find what I'm going to present as the results here? We actually wanted to look into issues ranging from the right of owning resources. As we remember, they are 51% of the population. So we see that if they have the rights of owning resources, we also looked into a little bit into leadership, particularly into political leadership, access to education and other social services. And we actually did a very small qualitative study, but which was carried on using a number of data sources, ranging from the National Bureau of Statistics, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, other journals, reports, magazine, as well as books. So I'll go directly to what actually we found. So demographically, as I've already mentioned, we have 51% of the population, which are women, but out of that, 54% of the population aged 60 are aged 60, and over 62% of those who are aged 60 are actually aged 80 years old, with life expectancy that is average above 60, but it's about 3 years more than for men. I'm not saying anything about that. It's just the data that talks about it that way. And also, agriculture is the main income-generating activity for women. This is what we found out when we were looking into the statistics, whereby women actually have about 36%, and that the other activity follows is casual laborers, where they also participate. But then again, 28% of these women remain mainly dependent. So you all understand, when you are dependent, you can't make decisions at times. And then again, 15% of women are business owners. Mainly, again, in non-agricultural trade, they account for about 54% of the what we call MSME, that is micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And this was from a survey that we found that was done in 2010. I'm sure the statistics have improved at the moment. But then now let's look into women and land ownership. And particularly I'm looking into this because I also work in agriculture, so I'm very much interested to see if you own land, then it's easier to commit resources and also produce. But what we found out is that only 15 to 16% of the total land is owned by women. And the remaining 47% is owned by men, but 37% is actually owned by, is co-owned, either a woman and a son, a woman and a husband, thank you, and so the co-ownership. But an interesting part is that the 15 to 16% of the owned land is actually smaller plot sizes, very minimal. So it puts up the limitation of using these resources, but then again, these women are actually the majority practitioners, again, in agriculture, although they don't have land, but they are also the majority practitioners. But again, they will be coupled, crippled, because they don't have authority or that particular resources. And again, we tried to look into access to education and other social services, and it seems like 6% more women than men have no formal education, leading to about 18% of those who are non-formally educated. So they lag behind men in their abilities to read and write, even in Swahili. And there also an issue with numerous skills that are significant below the national average. And we found out that this has caused less access because you are not aware of things, so you don't access right information, the right training. Also, some of the resources are like credit and the like. And then again, 6 out of 10 women do not own mobile phones because they perceive as it being a bit expensive, they can't handle it and stuff like that. But that could be because of lack to access of information. Now the big issue again comes into resources like financial services. So there have been great progress, as you can hear, Vikoba, and some other funny emojis going on with people trying to convince women that wanavuna sio in December. You have seen that. But again, it's still not enough. We see that there is a rise proportion of adult population using financial services, but there is still a gap, about 10% gender gap between men and women accessing the formal financial services. Again, 15% of women, as I've said earlier, they're business owners, but they can't get, they can't access financial services. So these challenges of accessing financial services include lack of literacy, as I've said earlier, the social, cultural, economic challenges. Again, 40% of women are being excluded as they perceive mobile phones to be too expensive. Now let's look into a very small issue in leadership. For example, in political leadership, from 1961 up to 2015, we really didn't have a woman who was in a high-level position in politics. For, let's say, a president or the vice president or attorney general or so. But there have been an increase in the number of women in the parliament of Tanzania since then. And this is perceived as a sign of inclusion and probably a way to actually foster the economic rights and justice, but not really. It hasn't reached to that level. We are happy right now that we have the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, the Honorable Mama Samia, and we also have seen some ministers who are women, but we are not really sure if that would really push inclusion of women to actually access this economic rights and justice. They could be there, but not really doing the like. So increase in the number of women leaders as well, who are occupying both public and private offices as a result of awareness creation, and so we have seen the trends in the few years that has passed. So now the key takeaways. I think I still have time, right? Okay. So the key takeaways now from this presentation is that the status of economic justice and rights of women in Tanzania is not sufficiently improved as per the global human rights standards. Access of land by women in Tanzania is still inferior. Access to formal education and other social services is still inferior. Access to financial services have improved but still inferior. And women are still not involved in decision making. And again, we have women, that is female representative, who have increased but not necessarily promoting gender equality issues. And thus, we think that the gender analysis must be fully integrated into law and policies formulation to actually try to look into issues of land, marriage, and inheritance to assist women. But I would just like to give a quick example. For example, right now, if you look at the financial inclusion and the like, we have like about $42 billion funding gap for female entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. How are you going to how are we going to cover that to assist, at least make women push further? Because they are the majority as well right now. See, again, we have examples, for example, only now if you come back to the research institutions, including academia and the like, only 30% of the researchers in sub-Saharan Africa are women, according to UNESCO estimates. So what is that telling us? I'm leaving that to for you guys to try and reflect. But then again, the question that I've been asked recently are this. So we have been hearing the talks from the morning today about equality, about this and this and this. So I was asked the question, I was challenged, and I would like to pose this also to you guys. Should equal pay for equal work be the right instrument to evaluate whether women are treated for their worth in the society? Or again, should the aspect of culture from different nationalities and its influence in women and men's interdependence be swept aside in the interest of ensuring one size fits all? In other words, can we use these ideas and look at our local perspective and then try to see how best we can improve the situation? Is our culture allowing us to move into that? I think we have had some questions from the participants also about that. So I'm leaving that to you guys. And thank you for listening. And thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Judith. Just for your information, I'm also interested in women's studies, and I normally identify myself as a feminist, but a philosophical feminist. Not radical feminist, neither liberal feminist. Okay. I can see the hand there. Please. Okay, Karibu, the question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can you stand up, please?
Thank you. Okay, I'm Vincent Onyango, master student in political science with a background of BA in philosophy and humanities. Just feeling intrigued by your lucid presentation based on female affairs in Tanzania. But I get so much worries from my education background as a teacher in Tanzania. I've always found women in Tanzania very much eloquent in writing and reading, contrary to the statistics that you gave, and it made me wonder how come this comes about in this presentation. Nonetheless, I'm just inspired by the moderator of this gathering, by not associating himself by any of the categories of feminism, but I'm feeling that he should maybe tell us, based on this presentation, whether you are a liberal feminist or just a women activist. Thank you.
So we'll take another 2 questions before presenter responds. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Sorry. Okay. Yes. Karibu.
Thank you. My name is Kevin from the College of Humanities. I would like to congratulate Miss Judith for her statistics. And I had some concerns on the social economics, particularly agriculture, that we Africans understand that the most economic activities in the world is agriculture. And we also have United Nations, exclusive of the continent of African nations. They have done a very small efficiency in regarding Miss Judith presentation on Tanzania women economic justice and rights prospects. Exactly less when it comes to the statistics of UN individuals and nations that Judith gave out. My contribution, there is a a unique rise that has connections with the philosophical involvement of God when it comes to the awareness and choices as well as decisions that some women, mainly, uniquely, those who are disabled, to get involvement in agriculture, mostly cultivation. Hence, the country of Tanzania is welcoming their work and efforts in a particular sector.
Sorry, if you can summarize your contribution, please.
Also, the summary, thank you, that Miss Judith, I would like to summarize from the last words that you spoke on the gap funding, 42 billion, all women's in the continent of Africa, they have for their social economic activities. I would work on it as an individual.
Thank you very much. I hope the presenters got something.
Yes.
There? Hello?
Yes.
No, the mic should be go there, down there. At least the students are.
Hello, my name is Irene. I am a master's student first year in ethics of governance and public services. In a country like Tanzania, where there is a seated deep root of cultural values and masculine dominance, it is very difficult to eradicate discrimination for women, and public and private sectors have tried so much, but still we see that there is no much improvement. Now my question is, should we still rely on the policies that we have right now and use them to change so that women can be able to achieve economic justice and rights? Or is it high time to change the policies that we have now? Because I feel like what the policies that we have now have not been helpful. So should we still be using them? Or is it high time that we wake up and change these policies, beginning with our constitution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the presenter to respond to those 2 or 3 questions. And that will mark our end of this presentation after her response. For those who have questions, please, we have the ways to present your questions through writings, for example, through email. I think you'll get the emails from our presenters. And maybe we'll start engaging with her or with the other presenters. So welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have about 3 people who contributed. I would like to start with the last. Well, if you talk of the policies, it's not easy to just say, let's change this, let's change that. We need to do a careful study to evaluate how has the policy really affected any operation. This goes, in a varied range of policies, not only for the policies that we're using for economic rights and justice, but if you are to say, let's change a policy, then you need to do a study that is going to really give out the correct measures as to, is it really the policy? Is it the practice? Probably the policy is good, but how we implement some of these strategies is not working. So you have to start somewhere. The study post the policy has implemented to see if actually the policy has been working. And then from there, we can say, okay, let's change the policy. Because we might have, as you can see, we might have a lot of good policies, but we don't see results. So the issue could be implementation. So I would like to stop there if I have answered your question. Again, if we go to the second person, he gave a contribution, but also I would like to say that the statistics that we see, we have a problem with a lot of statistics in this country. We have statistics from the NBS, we have from the World Bank, but then again, we go back to what we are supposed to use. We were instructed as academicians or as researchers to actually use statistics that are known by the government, that is, that are recognized by the NBS. So there could be varied statistics based on where you get the report, but also based on which data they used. So that I would say that. But then again, I will acknowledge the 42 billion that I've said is not only for Tanzania, but African women, which again are constituting the majority of the populations. So thank you for that. And now to the first person. You asked a very interesting question. I am not a feminist, I would like to say that. I'm a researcher, and actually in economics. So this is the highlight of what we find in most of the studies that we do that are actually mostly in agriculture. But I would say mostly in agribusiness, because that's where my specialty lies. So because I'm a woman, and I talked about women today, it shouldn't give you an indication that I'm a feminist or that way. So I think I answered that. And you said another thing, that you find it difficult to believe that there is that much percent of women who don't know how to read or write, even in Swahili, as I've presented. I tell you what, if you go through all the regions of Tanzania, then you give me the same answer. Because the people who you are meeting in classes, remember, have already got a chance to get education. So for example, they have gone to primary schools, and then they have gone to secondary Zakata, for instance. So it's not very easy to get that picture if you're looking at the people who are at the schools. But if you go to the communities, and I've worked a lot with communities, and then you realize that there is a very big problem. Someone can say, I don't want a phone, just because they don't even know how to read a message, you see. But a phone can help a person to do even transactions, to get the information. I'm a farmer, I'm based in a village, I don't know where I'm going to sell my maize. But because I can't use a phone, I can't read a message, I can't even be connected to the digital world because I can't read. So I guess that should be answering your question, and thank you.
If we can give more claps to our last presenter for this session. Yeah, in few minutes, few seconds, I'll be breaking for lunch. And the lunch also is combined with the visiting of the posters. There will be posters of different activities done by the members of faculty, member of our department, and our students. Also, alumni from Bachelor of Philosophy and Ethics and Masters of Ethics and Governance, Ethics of Governance, Public Service. they'll be there out if you want to ask them what about the causes. And we have also students who have graduated from our programs outside there. They are doing different different activities, so you may get inspiration from them. After lunch, then we'll be having another 3 presentations. So the procedure is like this. Students will use that door at the left-hand side. And the staff will use this door here at the right-hand side. No, that back door there. You'll use that door going to lunch. And VIP, you'll use this door for lunch. So you're welcome. Let's be time sensitive. We'll start on time at 13:45. We'll start another program here. So you're welcome. Thank you.
She's taking a breakfast.
Nachukua pochi.
Panda huku tu uje huku.
Okay. Sawa sawa.
Kuna title tu ingoja nataka